Hello, here I am again trying once more to make a recording of my talk on Canto 17. I think this one may actually turn out to work. Well, we shall see, shan't we? In any event, this will be a recording of part one of Canto 17. As I think you know, I split Canto 17 into two parts since there's so much in there, and I just kept adding slide after slide. And it's really a case where, as I said at the talk, that we have to examine very closely all of the cantos of Dante's Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, especially the ones that we may think are kind of boring or irrelevant, because that may be a signal that it's anything but boring and irrelevant. So we first look at this canto. We're going to talk a lot about users and usury, and that just seems to be not particularly relevant to us in our time, but in actual fact, it is quite relevant, as we shall see, I hope, in just a bit. With that being said, or at least I hope being said, one never knows, let us just start right into the Canto 17. And now, behold the beast with a pointed tail that passes mountains, annulling walls and weapons. Behold the one that makes the whole world stink. These are the words I heard my master say as he signaled for the beast to come ashore, up close to where the rocky levee ends. And that repulsive spectacle of fraud floated close, maneuvering head and chest onto the shore. But his tail he let hang free. His face was the face of any honest man. It shone with such a look of benediction, and all the rest of him was serpentine. His two clawed paws were hairy to the armpits. His back and all his belly and both flanks were painted arabesques and curlicues. The Turks and the Tartars never made a fabric with richer colors intricately woven, nor were such complex webs spun by Arachne. Now, at the end of the last canto, Virgil asked Dante for his belt, his cord belt, to summon a beast because they're pretty much at the end of circle 7, and get to circle 8 you had to descend this steep cliff. And they were going to need some help, and that help would be the monster Geryon, which we'll see named a little later on in the canto. So he summoned him with his belt, and his belt, Dante reminisced, was what he was going to use to capture the leopard, one of the three beasts are preventing him from ascending the mountain. Well, that was kind of a silly project, and Dante's beginning to realize it, and Virgil was now asking him to give it up entirely. Just don't rely on your own efforts, was what was symbolized, but take the efforts of allied with grace. That was the only way it was going to work. Now, another note is that we notes on verse 18, we have Arachne. Arachne was in a person in the Greek myth. She was an excellent weaver, but she got a little bit on the proud side and said basically nobody could weave better than her, and that would include the goddess Athena. Athena heard it, didn't think very highly of that, so challenged her to a contest. Well, Arachne, during the context, talked smack to Arachne and got her really provoked, so she was turned into a spider, and now she has her own little spider webs that she does. And here's a picture of Geryon done by Doré, and someone remarked that his face looked like the face of Mark Twain. Here he is right here, and you see the rest of his body, and right at the end here is a rather unpleasant stinger. Not a real fun companion, not a pet. Now, when I did this for the Thursday group, this is a rendition of a game, Inferno game, where the YouTube video is giving you instructions how to fight Garyon, and I'm told that that was kind of irrelevant and really too long. So if you want to watch it, that's fine, but I'm going to just basically ignore it.
Hi everyone, this is Big Ben.
go on to the next slide, which shows another look at Geryon. See, here he is with a pleasant face. Let us continue with the Canto. As sometimes fishing boats are seen ashore, part fixed in sand and part still in water, and as the beaver living in the land of the drunken Germans. Really? Dante doesn't think much of Germans, does he? Okay, drunken Germans squat to catch his prey, just so that beast, the worst of beasts, hung waiting on the bank that bounds the stretch of sand and stone. In the void beyond, he exercised his tail, twitching and twisting up the venom fork that armed its tip just like a scorpion stinger. My leaders said, "Now we must turn aside a little from our path in the direction of that malignant beast that lies in wait." Then we stepped off our path down to the right and moved 10 paces straight across the brink to keep the sand and flames at a safe distance. Well, here's another picture of the beast. You see, here he is. This is another Gustave Doré painting. And see, they're coming towards him, and his tail is curling out into the void here. The thematic significance. All right, it's a mythological monster, rules the entrance of the particular souls in the sphere. The monster Geryon symbolizes fraud, and like fraud, his innocent face fools the onlooker long enough to be stung by his scorpion-like tail. Now, let's look at what Hollander has to say about this situation. Virgil's description of Geryon, not identified by name until Inferno 17, verse 97, reflects his triple nature in classical literature. In the tradition known to Dante, he enticed strangers to be his guests, only to kill and eat them. That's not very friendly. He was eventually killed by Hercules. In the Aeneid, he is twice identified with the number 3. He is described as forma tricorporis umbriae, the form of the 3-bodied shade, and again as tergemini, Geryone, triple Geryon. Ovid says that in tribus unus erat, he was in 3. In classical literature, he is sometimes referred to as the king of the 3 Iberian islands, which may account for his tripleness. Dante's image was profoundly modified, however, by Pliny's description, followed by Solinus, and Pliny was a first-century Roman writer, naturalist, of a strange beast called Manticordia, which had the face of a man, the body of a lion, and a tail ending in a sting like a scorpion's. All these 3s find an answer in the 3 destructive action verbs describing him in the first tercet. This embodiment of fraud is thus presented as a counterfeit of Christ, 3 in 1 rather than 1 in 3. The very words that introduce this numerically central canto of the Inferno, Ecco la fiera, behold the beast, would seem to echo the familiar tag for Christ, Ecce homo, behold the man, in John chapter 19, verse 5. Positive words that accompany this description, invoking justice and benignity, remind us of the absence of such qualities in hell. Now they appear, but only as masks for fraud. The realm of violence here will show us its last set of sinners, usurers, men identified by bestial devices hanging from their throats. This first tip of the iceberg of fraud is in the form of a huge beast, his bestial and reptilian parts, at first mainly hidden in the void with the fair face of a man. The last book in the Christian scripture, and that would be the book of Revelation, tells of similar creatures. The locusts of destruction that will be loosed upon the world, who have faces like the faces of men and tails like the tails of scorpions with stingers in them. And that'd be Revelation chapter 9. Okay, now let's continue on with the canto. When we stood by Garion's side, I noticed a little further on some people crouched in the sand, quite close to the edge of emptiness. Just then my master spoke. So you may have a knowledge of this round that is complete, he said. Go and see their torment for yourself. But let your conversation there be brief. While you're gone, I shall speak to this one and ask him for a loan of his strong back. So I continued walking all alone along the seventh circle's outer edge to where the group of sufferers were sitting. The pain was bursting from their eyes. Their hands were scurrying up and down to give protection here from the flames, there from the burning sands. They were, in fact, like a dog in summertime, busy now with his paw, now with his snout, tormented by the fleas and flies that bit him. The sin here is those who show violence against nature and art. The sinners had lent money for interest and were known as usurers. All right, here's something from Hollander's commentary. Having learned that the homosexuals were punished by continual movement within the same circle, reflective of their agitated lives, the reader now finds the third set of the violent against God sitting in place, and thereby undergoing precisely the punishment that the violent against nature dreaded. Usurers, we may understand, had caused money to race from hand to hand, but were themselves stationary, unmoved movers, hunched over their desks in the pursuit of gain. We are in the third and final zone of the third ring of the seventh circle. Like the first, it is located at a margin of that circle. I examined carefully several faces among this group caught in the raining flames, and did not know a soul, but I observed that around each sinner's neck a pouch was hung, each of a different color, with a coat of arms, and fixed on these they seemed to feast their eyes. While I looked about among the crowd, I saw something in blue on a yellow purse that had the face and bearing of a lion. And while my eyes continued their inspection, I saw another purse as red as blood, exhibiting a goose more white than butter. And one who had the blue sow, pregnant looking, stamped on the whiteness of his money bag, asked me, "What are you doing in this pit? Get out of here. And since you're still alive, I tell you, my neighbor Vitilanio will come and take his seat on my left side. Among these Florentines I sit, one Paduan. Time after time they fill my ears with blasts of shouting, 'Send us down that sovereign knight, who will come bearing 3 goats on his pouch.' As a final comment, he stuck out his tongue as far as an ox licking his nose, and I, afraid of staying there much longer, might anger the one who warned me to be brief, turned my back on these frustrated sinners." Contrapposto. There's always a contrapposto, isn't there? Here's what's going on here. These sinners are crouched along a burning plain near the edge of a cliff while wearing a leather purse around their neck. The purses are blazoned with a coat of arms, while the sinners' eyes gush tears fixated on their purses. As they created nothing in their lives, they are surrounded by emptiness. Because their professions brought shame to their family name, they are forced to look upon their family crest. Here we have a near contemporary look at our painting of usurers. So this is a Renaissance painter, Quentin Metzis. And we see they look pretty scruffy and disreputable, do they not? And they're sitting there with their money, look rather disreputable at any rate. All right, let's look at this commentary. The representative of the Florentine Gianna Figulanzi family Black Guelph boasts a yellow purse with azure on it that had the face and manner of a lion. The representative of the Ghibelline or Bracci family wears a purse that was blood red, and it displayed a goose more white than butter. The usurer who speaks to Dante is a Paduan of the Scrovegni family, as indicated by the insignia on his money bag. A key social issue related to usury is anti-Semitism, which was frequently expressed in attacks on Jewish moneylenders. The commentary tradition of the Commedia does not look at the social and historic context of usury, and therefore, readings of Inferno 17 do not bring up the topic of anti-Semitism. Because anti-Semitism is not invoked as a relevant conceptual category with respect to usury, the commentary tradition does not register the absence of Jews from Dante's treatment of usury. As a result, the commentaries fail to notice two key features of Dante's treatment of usury in his canto. 1. Dante does not mention Jews. 2. He does not mention and feature the iconography that is associated with Jews, namely money bags. Dante's use of money bags and his placement of them around the neck of his users is very important, since it indicates his awareness of the iconography traditionally associated with Jews. And you can see here's an example of this. This is Jews with money bag in hell from a Psalter in northern France. And here's the money bag if you look closely. And so this is a Jew. He's identified as a Jew in hell by the money bag. And as we know, in medieval Europe, Jews were excluded from much of the social fabric or structure of medieval life. They certainly could not be a noble or a baron or a knight of any sort, because to do that you had to be a Christian. You had to swear a Christian oath to your liege lord. So they were excluded from that and from several other occupations. So usury was one that they could do, because while Christians were prohibited from loaning money to Christians and Jews were prohibited from loaning money to Jews, Jews could loan money to Christians, which was a useful thing for them to do, but also sometimes rather dangerous. Rachel Jacoff writes, by the time Dante was writing the Inferno, the negative association of Jews with usury were current, but Dante's users are all Christian. We can build on Jacoff's astute observation. Dante transfers the stereotypic image, the money bags worn around the neck, from the stereotypic wearers, from the Jews who are synonymous with users in much of Europe. Dante transfers the anti-Semitic trope of money bags around the neck to Christian users from well-known and non-Jewish families, two contemporary Florentine families, Giuffilani and Bracci, and one Paduan family. And also, I think, as I believe we'll see in part 2 of this talk about Canto 17, that in doing this, Dante universalizes the problem. It's not just a problem of some small group of outsiders in medieval Europe. As we'll see, this is a besetting sin of our current culture. And I think Dante is attempting to universalize this so we can see our own sin, as we should in each canto of the Inferno. Put into social and historic context, we can see that Dante's treatment of usury is remarkable for his strict avoidance of Jews, even though they were marginal, unimportant members of his society. Rather than scapegoat the marginal, Dante focuses instead on his society's most normative members, on the great Christian families whom he indicts through the heraldic crests that blazon the money bags worn around their necks. In other words, in Inferno 17, Dante evokes the precise iconography associated with Jewish usurers, namely the money bags worn around their necks, but he jettisons the anti-Semitic cultural context to which that iconography is linked. Dante then transfers the money bag iconography along with the status of the usurer to Christians. In Dante's hell, the money bags hang around the necks of Christian moneylenders. In a cultural context in which visual representations of hell were full of contemporary Jews depicted with the visual stereotypes that served as identifying markers of Jews, hooked noses, pharyngeal caps, and money bags, all documented in Strickland's book, the absence of any contemporary Jews in Dante's hell suggests the non-stereotyping nature of his imaginative process. Maybe this absence is in part why the prominent Jewish writer and scholar Emanuel ben Solomon, a Roman contemporary of Dante, so admired Dante that he wrote a Hebrew imitation of the Inferno and Paradiso and exchanged sonnets lamenting Dante's death with Bosone de Gubbio. Now, here's a question from David Bruce's commentary. Why is the punishment given to blasphemers and usurers fitting? The blasphemers, sodomites, and greedy moneylenders, usurers, are punished in a scorching desert. All of these sinners have committed sins in which they are violent against God or God's gifts. All of these sinners have committed sins in which they either take something that should be fertile and make it infertile, or take something that should be infertile and make it fertile. These sinners are on a sandy desert on which fire rains down, on which nothing can grow. The blasphemers ought to love God, but they curse God instead. The love of God ought to be fertile and result in good things, but the blasphemers curse something that ought to be regarded as valuable. They lie in the sandy desert and face upwards, looking towards that which they curse. Of course, when they open their mouths to curse God, flakes of fire fall into their mouths. In contrast, the greedy moneylenders take something that ought to be infertile and make it fertile. The definition of usury has changed over time, but originally, as in the Bible, it meant lending money at interest. The Bible is against lending money at interest to relatives or to poor people, though Jews are allowed to lend money at interest to non-Jews. Thus, Jews become the moneylenders of the Middle Ages. In modern times, usury is charging an unethically high rate of interest. In my opinion, that'd be David Bruce, the owners of modern check cashing places and the CEOs of many credit card companies in America may end up in the inferno. And in my opinion, they belong there. Because the greedy moneylenders have been taking something that ought to be infertile and making it fertile. They are in this burning plain with fire raining down on them. Here they have bent over, like the greedy moneylenders of Dante's time, bent over their tables and counting their money. Hanging from their necks are money bags, which they probably gazed at reverently in life, and now with revulsion. Dante cannot recognize any of the greedy moneylenders by looking at their faces. They were so preoccupied with making money that they have lost their individuality. Because the greedy moneylenders are bent over, gazing greedily at the money bags hanging from their necks, they are less able to avoid the flakes of fire falling on their bodies. And by the way, Dante does not identify any Jews as the greedy moneylenders in the Divine Comedy, which we already mentioned. Now, this is a commentary from another person. You can see the citation down at the bottom if you want to check it out and read more. Most everyone, including moral relevance, would yet condemn the first group. In the first group, remember we're in Circle 7, and the first group was those violent against other people. There were people stuck in the river of blood. Our society, however, has been systematically rejecting the notion that the other 5 groups here are punished are sinners at all. And the other 5 groups would be suicides in the central circle, or subdivision of the seventh circle. And then we have in this final subdivision, we have the burning desert, which we have the blasphemers, the homosexuals, and usurers. In fact, we witnessed an increasing tendency with apotheosis is same-sex marriage to glorify these sins as if they were virtues. Suicide, violence against one's own life and body, is called the right to die with dignity. Profligate spenders are routinely held up as icons of self-actualization. Blasphemy is common to the point where hearing the name of God, the name at which every knee shall one day bend, see Philippians chapter 2, verse 10, Jesus Christ, is common only when it's being used precisely as a blasphemous swear word. Likewise with the name God, which is heard less often with reverence than it is as an expression often shortened to OMG of shock and surprise. If these trends weren't bad enough, sodomy, seen again not as a sin but as a right, and usury, including loan shark practices advertised openly on television, are becoming fundamental to our culture and economy. These sins, all of which are sins of violence against God, directly or indirectly, fester at the root of our culture, driving us away from God and into the awaiting arms of Satan. If there is but one circle of Dante's hell which every American needs to study, this is the one. In fact, these sins are so common and so celebrated, it might do us all some good to review these sins and our attitudes to them. And I agree with this author, which is one reason why this is a two-part study of a canto instead of just a one-week one. And next week, we're going to look much closer at some of the potentially besetting sins of our culture that originate in the sin dealt with in this circle. And here is the primary Old Testament citation about usury. And this will be Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 19 through 21. You have it now here in the NIV version. Do not charge a fellow Israelite interest, whether on money or food or anything else that may earn interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but not a fellow Israelite, so that the Lord your God may bless you in everything you put your hand to in the land you're entering to possess. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. So, thus ends part one, and part two is to come, and I will be attempting to put that on a YouTube video very soon.
In mythological ancient Greece, soaring above Crete on wings made from wax and feathers, Icarus, the son of Daedalus, defied the laws of both man and nature. Ignoring the warnings of his father, he rose higher and higher. To witnesses on the ground, he looked like a god, and as he peered down from above, he felt like one too. But in mythological ancient Greece, the line that separated God from man was absolute, and the punishment for mortals who attempted to cross it was severe. Such was the case for Icarus and Daedalus. Years before Icarus was born, his father Daedalus was highly regarded as a genius inventor, craftsman, and sculptor in his homeland of Athens. He invented carpentry and all the tools used for it. He designed the first bathhouse and the first dance floor. He made sculptures so lifelike that Hercules mistook them for actual men. Though skilled and celebrated, Daedalus was egotistical and jealous. Worried that his nephew was a more skillful craftsman, Daedalus murdered him. As punishment, Daedalus was banished from Athens and made his way to Crete. Preceded by his storied reputation, Daedalus was welcomed with open arms by Crete's king Minos. There, acting as the palace technical advisor, Daedalus continued to push the boundaries. For the king's children, he made mechanically animated toys that seemed alive. He invented the ship's sail and mast, which gave humans control over the wind. With every creation, Daedalus challenged human limitations that had so far kept mortals separate from gods, until finally he broke right through. King Minos' wife, Pasiphae, had been cursed by the god Poseidon to fall in love with the king's prized bull. Under this spell, she asked Daedalus to help her seduce it. With characteristic audacity, he agreed. Daedalus constructed a hollow wooden cow, so realistic that it fooled the bull. With Pasiphae hiding inside Daedalus' creation, she conceived and gave birth to the half-human, half-bull Minotaur. This, of course, enraged the king, who blamed Daedalus for enabling such a horrible perversion of natural law. As punishment, Daedalus was forced to construct an inescapable labyrinth beneath the palace for the Minotaur. When it was finished, Minos then imprisoned Daedalus and his only son Icarus within the top of the tallest tower on the island, where they were to remain for the rest of their lives. But Daedalus was still a genius inventor. While observing the birds that circled his prison, the means for escape became clear. He and Icarus would fly away from their prison as only birds or gods could do. Using feathers from the flocks that perched on the tower and the wax from candles, Daedalus constructed 2 pairs of giant wings. As he strapped the wings to his son Icarus, he gave a warning. Flying too near the ocean would dampen the wings and make them too heavy to use. Flying too near the sun, the heat would melt the wax and the wings would disintegrate. In either case, they surely would die. Therefore, the key to their escape would be in keeping to the middle. With the instructions clear, both men leapt from the tower. They were the first mortals ever to fly. While Daedalus stayed carefully to the midway course, Icarus was overwhelmed with the ecstasy of flight and overcome with the feeling of divine power that came with it. Daedalus could only watch in horror as Icarus ascended higher and higher, powerless to change his son's dire fate. When the heat from the sun melted the wax on his wings, Icarus fell from the sky. Just as Daedalus had many times ignored the consequences of defying the natural laws of mortal men in the service of his ego, Icarus was also carried away by his own hubris. In the end, both men paid for their departure from the path of moderation dearly. Icarus with his life, and Daedalus with his regret.